We're learning more about some of the evidence that prosecutors had hoped to present against Bryan Kohberger at his trial that didn't end up happening, along with more details about who would have testified and another possible tie between Bryan Kohberger and his fixation with Ted Bundy, plus the latest on what's going on with him in prison. Welcome to Crime Fix. I'm Angenette Levy. Bryan Kohberger, he's been in prison now for nearly 3 months, and he's at the very, very beginning of serving 4 consecutive life sentences behind bars. A trove of documents related to the heinous murders of Maddie Mogen, Kaylee Goncalves, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin were sealed for months and in some cases years. And now that Kohberger has admitted to the crimes, those documents are slowly being unsealed. And they're telling more of the horrific and sad story of what happened in the house on King Road that night. We're also learning more about who prosecutors and the defense team plan to call as witnesses at the trial. And some of that is pretty revealing given what Bill Thompson told me last month about how they were going to present the case at trial.
What is your working theory, Bill, about this crime and why he did this? I mean, you have to have some type of working theory. I mean, juries like to hear stories. You have to tell the jury a story. So what was your working theory here about why Bryan Kohberger went to King Road that night and who specifically he was targeting?
Well, Angenette, at going into trial, we really weren't going to be proposing a working theory like you just discussed. Our focus was on the evidence showing that we have these horribly murdered young people and the evidence that proves beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant is the one who was responsible for it. The lack of the backstory is something that we have to factor in. It's not an element of the crime. It's not something the jury will be asked to decide on, but human nature is such that if they get distracted by that, they could start creating questions in their own mind that had nothing to do with whether or not the defendant was guilty. So our approach at trial really was going to be much like what we did when we were in court on July 2nd, when the guilty plea entered and the factual summary of our evidence. That was going to be the trial and focus the jury on the elements under the law and what the proof was of those elements.
So very clinical, circumstantial evidence. We have the DNA, we have the cell phone stuff, we have the white Elantra.
Exactly.
Okay, so first off, the prosecutors, they had no intention of calling Bryan Kohberger's parents as witnesses. That came up in pretrial hearings, but their names were not on the witness list. But Bryan Kohberger's sister, Amanda Kohberger, she was the only family member on the witness list, and prosecutors did not imply that she had any knowledge of the murders. I want to be clear on that. Prosecutors wrote in their trial brief, the state intends to call family members of defendant for the purpose of establishing certain facts before defendant moved to Pullman in late summer 2022, as well as facts about defendant's conduct when he returned home in Pennsylvania in December 2022. The nature of this testimony has been disclosed through reports of interviews. Now, there had been endless speculation about Kohberger's parents knowing or suspecting their son committed the crimes because he called his parents that morning. But I've told you in the past that experts with Celebrate said he did that every day anyway. He talked to his parents a lot throughout the day, so it was no big deal. Prosecutors would have potentially presented hundreds and hundreds of exhibits, including photos, audio and video interviews, and other visual aids. And they collected DNA samples from a lot of people to either include them or exclude them as suspects. Those would have been exhibits at trial as well. The defense, meanwhile, was going to call 16 experts to attack evidence presented by the prosecution. Those included cell phone experts like Cy Ray, who I've told you about before, a crime scene expert who would have told jurors he believed 2 weapons and 2 people committed the crimes, and a computer forensics expert and a DNA analyst, along with several others. Bryan Kohberger didn't have an alibi. That was out the window. He had conceded he was out driving around that night, so attacking the evidence was really all they had. The defense also revealed in discovery that a forensic psychiatrist interviewed Bryan Kohberger's family. Her name is Dr. Eileen Ryan, and she works at The Ohio State University. She specializes in adult and child psychiatry and obsessive compulsive disorder. Documents reveal that she conducted a family evaluation of Bryan Kohberger's parents and his sister Amanda in late 2024, and then in-person individual evaluations of his mother and two older sisters the following day. Dr. Ryan interviewed other people too and looked at other materials. Washington State University professor Amelie Pedno could have been called to testify about Bryan Kohberger. She had told investigators she felt like Kohberger wanted to work with her but never asked. She was also concerned about the way he treated female students. Kohberger had read a paper that she had written about Ted Bundy. A female student from Washington State University was also on the witness list. And so was John Snyder, the professor for whom Kohberger worked as a teaching assistant. Snyder didn't have anything positive to say about Bryan Kohberger, although he did tell investigators he didn't notice bias in his grading when it came to female students. We're also going to talk a little bit more about some of Bryan Kohberger's selfies. We found some from Mount Rainier National Park near Seattle. One appears to have the word sluts in the background. We looked that up. The stones commemorate the first climb of Mount Rainier. It actually states Sluiskin Indian Guide waited here for the climbers to return, but the framing is interesting. The foothills of Mount Rainier is also where Ted Bundy may have dumped the remains of a woman he confessed to killing in 1974. Her name was Gail Manson, and investigators believe her remains were found there in the 1970s, but those remains were later lost and never tested. I cover a lot of really terrifying cases here on Crime Fix, and if it's taught me anything, it's that privacy and personal safety absolutely cannot be compromised, especially when it comes to your personal data online. You would be shocked at how much of your information, like your name, your phone number, and even your home address, is just floating around the internet for data brokers to find and sell. Ever wonder why you get so many of those annoying spam calls and emails? That's why. Our sponsor, Incogni, is a critical tool that helps you take back control by automatically identifying which data brokers have your info and then demanding that they remove it. Incogni actually found more than 50 brokers with my information, and within days, the company started getting me removed. It's so easy to use. Just create an account, authorize Incogni to act on your behalf, and let them handle the rest. And now Incogni users can wipe their info from an even wider range of websites with the unlimited plan's new custom removals feature. All you need to do is copy and paste the links to sites where you've noticed concerning data breaches cropping up and creating issues in your life, and a team of privacy specialists will take care of the rest. The new Incogni Unlimited feature even allows users to customize their data removals and tackle the toughest of breaches with the help of a team of privacy specialists. So if you care about your online safety, and you really should, take your personal data back with Incogni. Use code CrimeFix below on the screen and get 60% off an annual plan. All right, so to discuss what we're learning out of these newly unsealed records, I want to bring in Chris McDonough. He is the host of The Interview Room, also a retired homicide detective, and he works with the Cold Case Foundation. So, Chris, we're learning some new details, some things that are pretty gruesome regarding the injuries to the victims. Some things I think we didn't really quite know before. We're now learning that Xana had skull fractures. We knew she had been stabbed more than 50 times. Now we're reading in some of these exhibits that she actually had skull fractures. We knew that Kaylee had been badly injured. And now we're learning that Maddie had wounds on her face, around her ear, some imprint from the weapon on her chest. I mean, it's really... it gets more and more graphic the more that we learn.
Yeah, and this gives us an idea, Angenette, of how the intensity that Bryan Kohberger was displaying inside of that room. I mean, if we think about just that one wound, the imprint of the weapon on her chest, is that a full, hilt stab wound? I've had many cases where the weapon has gone completely into the victim and it's left a mark of the hilt of the knife on their body? Or is it the opposite? Is it the handle where there has the, the square end of it where he's using it as a item, to bludgeon them to death? The fact that both of them have, skull injuries just tells us his target of attack, or facial injuries. The perpetrator is focused on, personalization, for lack of a better term, and or disruption in Xana's case. And he has transferred that aggression into his ferocity.
Yeah, it certainly shows. I think this whole thing spun out of control. I've said it many times before. That doesn't mean that I'm right. I think he went in there for possibly one person, and then it just went not according to his sick plan. But I could be totally wrong about that. But the more we're learning, we knew that this was a vicious, awful. They called it, heinous and cruel. With what the statute calls it when you want to pursue the death penalty. But this is, it's so sick and demented. It just seems very chaotic. I guess that, like, in your field of work and people who analyze crime scenes, kind of disorganized. Would you say that that's accurate?
Yeah, I think it's spun into a disorganized crime scene, to your point. But I believe he went in there as an organized offender initially. And then as things started to, get disrupted, i.e. two people in the first room, Maddie and Kaylee, and now, that situation's going down, which was potentially unexpected. And now you have Xana coming in and interrupting that first fantasy play. Okay, remember, everything that Bryan Kohberger did started first in his mind months and months ago, if not even maybe a year prior to the homicide. And then, he built his target set, and his fantasy built off of that target set. And then he started to prepare and he executed. And that was, all part of an organized offender. But to your point, I agree with you. Once he got in there, that fantasy went, to heck. And now it becomes disorganized. What do I do? How do I do it? Which was unanticipated. And that rage could be shown in the rage towards the victims.
For the longest time, obviously, he maintained his innocence. His attorneys were fighting this case. He was, I guess, demanding to go to trial. They were going to call a number of witnesses. They were mostly going to call experts in their case in chief to try to back down what the state was contending in this case, that Bryan Kohberger was the one person who committed these crimes. They were going to try to say it was two people and two weapons. They were going to say a number of different things. Obviously, they folded, they caved at the last minute. They went asking for a deal. We know what happened. The state, though, it was interesting to see their witness list because they were going to call people from Washington State University. They had kind of indicated at a pretrial hearing, at least this Jeff Nye did from the assistant or the attorney general's office. He said at one point, we have much better aggravating evidence than people at WSU saying mean things about Bryan Kohberger. Bryan Kohberger's ears kind of perked up. But, they had people from WSU who they were going to call to the stand. The state did in its case in chief, which I find very interesting. They were going to call John Snyder, the professor for whom Bryan Kohberger was working as a TA. John Snyder didn't have one nice thing to say about Bryan Kohberger. They were going to call Amelia Pedno, the professor who wrote her thesis on Ted Bundy. So we know that he was interested in Ted Bundy. He had a lot of interest in Ted Bundy. So they were going to call her. They were going to call the chair of the department potentially to talk about how they were going to give Bryan Kohberger the boot. His whole world was collapsing. They were going to call another student who was in the department. We know that he had clashes with women in the department. So do you think they were kind of trying to show, even though they've never come out and said it publicly, do you think they were going to kind of highlight that this is somebody who had an animus toward women, that he was a misogynist?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think where the state was going there was to kind of lay out, what this guy really was like even before the murders. And then, and the only way you can do that is do what we call pattern of life, right? We have to interview all kinds of witnesses and get the idiosyncrasies that they observed, and or the anger. You want to kind of go into a Q&A with witnesses like that. So tell me about how he would respond if pushed, for an example, or if you gave him a bad grade or anything like that. And that's where those professors come in, because you want that, because the defense is going to play him off as he's just a confused yada yada kind of guy, right? But the prosecution has to show beyond reasonable doubt that no, this guy has all kinds of issues, and by the way, they're correlated back to serial killers, primarily Ted Bundy.
You kind of found something interesting in the selfies, and you pointed it out to me. Bryan Kohberger, his lawyers said, this is a guy who liked to hike. He would go out hiking a lot. I mean, he had pictures in his phone where he would go out and take pictures at night. We don't see really any of the night pictures they talked about. They talked about when he was out, with his so-called alibi driving around at night that we now know was not an alibi. And I think we knew it back then, but we had to talk more nicely about it then. But he, or at least I did, but now I can say, I always said it was alibi-ish, but not really an alibi, not an alibi. But you pointed out to me that in all of these selfies, you think he was at Mount Rainier, and that's significant because of the Ted Bundy fascination. So talk to me about that.
So one of my theories has always been, since I was on the ground on this thing, why the house, right? Why 1122 King Road? What's the purpose of that? Because he had to know there were at least 5 women who were living in that house. And then if you overlay that in his obsession with Ted Bundy and, the murders in the sorority in Florida, my thought process was that the house was a target, and then he fixated on a particular woman within inside of that house, i.e. either Kaylee or Maddie upstairs. Okay. And the reason I say that is my thought process is he picking up where Ted Bundy left off? And he's going to one up Ted Bundy, for lack of a better term. And so if you look at his selfies and you look in the background, that mountain range appears to be Mount Rainier. Well, that was Ted Bundy's playground when he was at WSU and hanging around the state of Washington. And there's also photographs in there where it shows Bryan Kohberger's hatred towards women. He can't get away from the fact that he sees some writing on a rock, for an example, and then he takes a selfie with that particular rock, and the verbiage on that rock is the word sluts. And you pointed out a great picture where he's at a baseball game, and in the background, there's a woman behind him. But what's interesting about that photograph is he's making that menacing smile in that particular photograph. The one that, quite frankly, that's what the victims would have seen had he not been wearing a mask.
Wow. It's like every time we look at stuff, we learn a little bit more. One thing that I found very interesting, and I know this is probably just what psychiatrists do, but forensic psychiatrist Dr. Eileen Ryan, she evaluated Bryan Kohberger's mother and his sisters one-on-one. There was a family evaluation with Michael Kohberger, mom, Marianne, and then the older sister, Melissa. But then there were one-on-one individual evaluations with mom, sister, and sister, Amanda and Melissa. I find that to be fascinating. They didn't do a one-on-one individual evaluation with dad. They did it with the women in the family. I thought that was really interesting. Is that maybe Yeah, they want to see, okay, is he OCD? Is he whatever? Is he not coordinated? Or is there something in there about like, wow, what's his diet? What was his upbringing like with the women in his house?
Yeah, and that's a great point, because maybe there's also this idea of, if we can separate him from this hatred of women by applying this idea to the women around him while he was growing up, they could start looking for and present to a jury that no, he was just a normal, brother, a normal son, etc. And also, you could separate this correlation idea of Ted Bundy, because remember, you have mom writing this editorial piece about the death penalty and Ted Bundy. You just wonder how much influence he had from mom and her obsession potentially with Ted Bundy. So the defense would have to separate that through those types of interviews and evaluations.
Let's talk now about, all this chitter chatter about, oh my God, Bryan Kohberger pleaded guilty because his sister was on the witness list and she was going to spill the beans. Well, his sister, he would have known she was on the witness list since April. So I personally don't buy that was the tipping point. I personally think they were out of time. He wasn't getting a continuance. And he knew he was possibly looking at that long walk down the hall to the firing squad. And that's scary. So maybe reality hit. But Amanda Kohberger was possibly going to be called to testify. The state said about his behavior before the homicides and when he came home from Christmas break. That might have been very interesting to hear about what she would have been asked about.
Yeah, and I don't think that's over yet. I think at some point Bryan is going to continue to exercise, his ability to control the narrative and control the circumstances right now. And I think he'll utilize his sister, and I think his sister will go along with it at some point, not, to get fame or fortune for herself, but try to get into a better understanding of what really pushed her brother over the edge. And I think Bryan's going to utilize the tools available to him in the jail system, in the prison system, i.e., email, et cetera. And they're going to create this dialogue. Look at other family members who have done that with their parents, for an example. Okay. They waited years and years and years, and then eventually they said, hey, I need to know what's going on in your head. And I think his sister's in the exact same spot. So it's going to be fascinating to see what she ever says. But I think that's where the defense was going here, to your point.
And finally, I want to know what the latest is that you're hearing about him in prison. We got that document dump from the Idaho Department of Corrections a while ago. And then I put in another request and I got nothing. I got nothing that I requested except this is where he's housed. So I don't know if they weren't supposed to release the stuff that we initially were given. I just don't know. But I haven't been given anything else that I've been requested regarding grievances he's filed or anything like that. I can't imagine after that first release that he's just like, okay, I'll stop complaining. Are you hearing, is he still complaining? Is he still having a hard time?
Yeah, he's still complaining, and he's not making a lot of friends or influencing a lot of people. He's still segregated, but everything about him, his personality, et cetera, is all about Bryan Kohberger. And he's constantly, writing to the staff, correcting them, that kind of stuff. It's the same stuff he was doing in the past. And I think the prison has kind of shut a little bit more or gotten a lot more tighter with the flow of information based on that leak of the video that came forward. So I think, the hammer came down on staff saying, look, this isn't going to happen again. And so they're creating this one track out for the flow of information. But he's still up to being Bryan Kohberger and controlling his own circumstances.
Well, and they identified who leaked that video. They said the person is had the person resigned when confronted, then they're not going to prosecute. But yeah, it's interesting that we haven't been given through FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, any additional materials as far as the grievances go and stuff like that. But they haven't stopped, according to what you're telling me.
Yeah, no, he's still moving in terms of complaining about his environment, about everything around him, about the people around him, which is obviously not a good move because at some point they're going to have to figure out, we got to put this guy into general population. And at that point, he could have a bigger target on himself.
Very interesting. Well, maybe he needs to read that Dale Carnegie book that you referenced earlier. Might want to check that out of the library there at the prison if they have it. Chris McDonough, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Angenette. Appreciate you.
And that's it for this episode of Crime Fix. I'm Angenette Levy. Thanks so much for being with me. I'll see you back here next time.